Enfold Proactive Health Trust, Creating Safe Spaces, presents Demystifying Sexuality, a video series. Which socio-cultural factors enable sexual offenders? What can we do to change them? Presented by Smita Chimanda, Lead Content Development.
Hi, I'm Smita, Content Lead at Enfold Proactive Health Trust. I'd like to share some perspectives and some information about what in our culture and our social structures enables perpetrators to sexually abuse others, while many sections of our society view these acts as reprehensible and as a violation of basic child and human rights. This duality has to be understood so we can act effectively to stop or minimize these crimes against children and adults. A cursory search on the internet for sexual abuse and violence throws up some results like why does child sexual abuse occur? How to prevent sexual abuse? Helplines for women, types of sexual violence is preventable, and such. This is problematic language and positioning of the matter because it makes it sound like sexual abuse and violence is a natural phenomenon that it can be researched, it can be categorized, and it can be guarded against. It doesn't bring the spotlight on the perpetrator of the abuse. And instead of framing the issue as why do people sexually abuse others, how to stop adults from sexually abusing children, it brings the focus on the target or the victim of the abuse. This is what I want to talk about in this video. What in our society, our culture, our families, and our upbringing makes a person believe that they're entitled to or that they can get away with, and that there is nothing or little wrong with sexually abusing another person. Patriarchy is pervasive in most cultures and societies around the world, and it's normalized to the extent that we've internalized these values and we approve of it as a way of life. Patriarchal systems thrive on maintaining control over people who for generations have suffered injustice and currently are in no position to exercise their power. It entails treating them as individuals who don't have the ability and must not, therefore, have any agency in deciding for themselves. Children, women, and sexual and gender minorities form the constituency over whom the man enforces his control and will. In India, sexual violence is also used as a tool by upper caste men to oppress and suppress lower caste communities by inflicting violence on Dalit and Bahujan women's bodies as a way of teaching a lesson to their community, as a way of crushing dissent and upholding the caste system. The recent cases of rape and murder of Dalit girls in North India has to cause us growing concern about the uptick in such patterns. Children especially are considered the properties of their adult caregivers. Adults take upon themselves a responsibility to decide for their wards what is good, what is bad, what's right, wrong, safe or not, and such. We've often heard adults say, "This is my child. I will decide what's in their best interest. This is my child. Who are you to tell me what to do about them?" Or, "This is my child and they will do as I say." Children have little physical power or any political or economic power with which to negotiate with anybody. Very clearly, this creates a system and an environment where the child is unable to resist or push back against anything that the adult says or does, even if the child feels uncomfortable, unsafe, and violated. This is especially so when it relates to sexual matters, because as it is, it's considered a taboo to talk about these. Sexual harassment and abuse have been normalized for long in our society. Even among adults and in adult relationships, the woman is expected to bear with the unwanted attention of men, to feel chastised by it if she's less than conservative in her thoughts and behaviors, to feel flattered by it, and to see it as a sign of the man's interest in her, or to ignore it because, of course, men will be men, and it's the woman who has to show restraint and strength of character. Consent is barely considered important. For example, in the framework of a marriage, the woman's role is often reduced to that of a homekeeper and a sexual partner, not one who has a place that is equal to her husband's. The wife is there for the sexual satisfaction of her spouse, and that is not meant to be questioned. When it is, there's incredulity that we all face. For after all, didn't marriage presuppose that the husband can have sex with his wife whenever he desires? Indian laws do remain silent on this even today. In the case of children, then, this mindset translates into a greater sense of entitlement over them, since children are thought of as lesser individuals than even the oppressed adults. When seen through the patriarchal lens, the act of sexual fulfillment and pleasure is framed as one that is a prerogative of the male. The male sexual energy is thought of as a sign of virility and manhood, something that needs regular expression and cannot be easily controlled. Men will be men or boys will be boys is a euphemism for society's need to overlook and normalize sexual transgressions of males and treat them as normal or something to be expected and something that the rest of the society has to take care of, not to entice or provoke. Girls are taught very early on to dress and behave modestly, lest they attract the attention of boys and men who might harass them, stalk them, pester them into sexual relationships, and who might retaliate with violent actions if they are thwarted. Boys are taught that it is okay to pursue. In fact, it's manly to pursue a girl and to keep at it until she gives in, even if she is reluctant, scared, and distressed. Friends also egg the boy on. In late adolescence, it's often a matter of competition to prove one's machismo and desirability to pursue as many girls as possible and win their affection and even beg them before moving on to the next girl. The persistence that a man shows towards winning the affection of a woman is lauded as their passionate love for her and their determination to get what they want. In the process, objectifying the woman as something to obtain, to win over. The overarching theme in our cinema over the decades has been of the hero finding a woman that he desires and pursuing her till she relents to his advances. Boys are brought up to believe that they can get what they want if they go after it. And the only deterrent are other boys who may be thought of as more manly than them. Boys and men are constantly told that they have to assert their masculinity in visible ways, lest they are seen as a sissy or a weak person. Anyone not meeting these standards of masculinity are sexually ridiculed, harassed, and abused. And typically, these include members of the queer community, including effeminate and transgender persons. The idea that the target of their affection may not be interested in them is not entertained, and the slightest affront or refusal is justified as reason enough to get even with them. Movie after movie shows men putting arrogant women in place through the use of threat or violence, arrogant women being those who do not show interest in the hero. And these scenes are often greeted with hooting and cheering in the theaters. The focus is on teaching our children how to avoid getting harassed or abused rather than preventing perpetrators from committing such acts. Maybe because it's easier to control children rather than entitled adult men. Maybe it's also a way of entrenching patriarchal norms early on with children, so they grow up knowing how gender-related power dynamics work. We achieve this rather successfully by adding shame to the mix and suggesting to children, women, and gender minorities that their experiences of sexual abuse must have been fully or partly their own doing. They need to feel that if they had not enticed an abuser so, if they had resisted more vocally, and if they had not cooperated with the abuser, then the abuse wouldn't have occurred. This, along with the shame of losing one's honor, which is what sexual abuse is often equated to, offers the abuser a convenient system to manipulate and violate children and oppressed genders. On the other hand, excuses are made for the perpetrator, like he must have been drunk, she must have provoked him, she must have insulted her in-laws, she must have kept the house clean, she must have been flirting with him and asking for it. He was probably under too much stress, and she must have insulted him. He's from such a good cultured family, he couldn't have done this. She must have done something to provoke him. Since sexual acts are perceived as closely linked to the honor of a person, especially girls and women, it is also seen as a way of disciplining a wayward woman or her family. Perpetrators of sexual violence disproportionately target marginalized communities. For instance, they may target members of the queer community with a certainty that their orientations and identities can be cured by forceful sexual acts, or at the very least, that they are punished for who they are. In some parts of the country, sexual violence is normalized as a way of settling scores with someone, where the female family members of the people in conflict are used as collateral in this conflict. As mentioned earlier, sexual violence against women of caste and religious minorities are used as a way of putting that particular community in place by stripping them of their honor through the act. The legal framework has also been quite ineffective in preventing child sexual abusers and perpetrators of sexual violence from committing these crimes. While we have laws that have been drafted to deter child sexual abusers, there remains much to be desired in their implementation. often fraught by inconsistencies and lapses in evidence collection, witnesses who turn hostile due to pressure from the offending party, survivors who are pressurized to withdraw their complaints or who are disbelieved, and lawmakers who are also drawn from our patriarchal society. Justice is seldom achieved. Abusers who are aware of these inconsistencies and lapses in our systems are undeterred, therefore, by the prospect of being convicted for their crime. Recent judgments where the POCSO Act was inappropriately interpreted to allow the accused to go free because the judge thought that the alleged crime wasn't serious enough, or where the judge thought that if the accused married the complainant, that is reparation enough. These kind of judgments have been brought under the scrutiny of the Supreme Court after outrage from multiple quarters. The laws also do not seem to be drafted based on any psychological study of perpetrator behaviors. For example, the amendment to POCSO, which increased the quantum of punishment to the death penalty for aggravated penetrative sexual assault, has failed to deter perpetrators. It has instead possibly caused more harm to targets of sexual abuse, with perpetrators incapacitating their victims so they're in no position to report their abusers. In cases of domestic violence, there's a widespread belief that one should not intervene into others' personal matters, which covers violence against women and children. In the event that a survivor places a complaint, the process of submitting clinching evidence and investigating the violence is often time-consuming and cumbersome. This provides sufficient time to the perpetrator and their allies to threaten, cajole, and have the victim withdraw the complaint or become hostile. Given the widespread nature of this patriarchal belief system that enables privileged sections of the community to sexually assault others, a wide array of interventions are also needed to address these acts of crime, ranging from efforts at the individual level to systemic interventions at the community and at the social level. Foremost among these are to challenge the idea of patriarchal dominance of the male gender, to be mindful of and change the nature of the spaces and dialogue, or the lack of it, that continue to allow perpetrators to feel secure and potent in committing these acts of violence against others. Simultaneously, there must be ongoing dialogues to dissociate the ideas of honor, shame, and purity from sexual organs and acts, on unburdening oppressed groups from the anxiety and responsibility of maintaining honor and character. It will be to build the confidence and capacity of people of vulnerable, oppressed, and minority genders to stand up against such imposition of patriarchal rules and practices, to feel adequate enough and not co-opt into these practices given the societal and cultural pressures we face. Perpetrators have to be held accountable for their actions and made to take reparative and restorative action swiftly and fairly. Offenders have to be called out for their violations, whether they're seemingly mild and harmless acts of eve teasing, cracking profane jokes about women and gender minorities, or violent acts of sexual assault. The social, medical, and legal systems, which are currently more intimidating and complex for survivors to navigate through than for a perpetrator, should be transformed to make justice more accessible and achievable. Each of these will require us to come together to join hands and make this happen. Thank you.
This video is part of a series of videos and learning content aimed at addressing gender-based violence. These videos provide practitioner perspectives by professionals and experts in the field. We hope these videos generate further discussions with peers, family members, and teachers, encourage curiosity, and seed further research ideas in these domains. We gratefully acknowledge the following for their support: Gaurav Krishna, Keshav Rajendran, Ishwar Shankar, Mohan Ram, Clockwork Captions, Enfold Consultants, Ford Foundation. The copyright and other intellectual property rights in respect of this video belong exclusively to Enfold Proactive Health Trust, Enfold. Enfold licenses this video under the terms of Creative Commons License CC BY-NC-ND 4.0, the details of which can be found at https://creativecommonlicense.org/licenses/by-NC-ND/4.0/. Any use or reproduction of this video contrary to or in violation of the terms of the aforesaid Creative Commons license will be illegal, and Enfold reserves the right to take suitable action in respect thereof. Enfold also reserves the right to modify, terminate, or revoke the license granted as aforesaid or otherwise exercise any and all rights in respect of its intellectual property without further notice, and the same shall be binding on the licensee or user or reader thereof. June 2021. Enfold Proactive Health Trust. www.enfoldindia.org. Contact info@enfoldindia.org. +91 99 000 94251. www.enfoldindia.org.